SAfm.
Thanks for staying with us here on AM Live on SAfm, South Africa's news and information leader. I'm Sakina Kamwendo, and it is time now for the forum at 8. It is 8 minutes past 8, and this morning we're dealing with a very interesting question. At least as a team, we thought so. And rather apt, considering that it's 20 years into our democracy, and yet we seem to be struggling with some of the more basic issues, such as trust and, for the most part, distrust when it comes to dealing with one another. Now, do we trust each other? And if not, why are we not in a position to feel that we can trust someone that we normally would not have had any sort of association with? We're talking about the distrust that we have for one another 20 years after the advent of our democracy. My guest this morning will examine some of the factors contributing to this, and hopefully we'll be able to answer the question, why is there still a culture of distrust amongst South Africans today? I would also love to hear from you and have an authentic, frank conversation about this particular subject. What is it that you distrust about other people? That's what we'd love to hear, and perhaps we can find a way forward in how we deal with one another. 0891 104 208, that's the number to dial. You can also SMS on 34701, or you can send messages to Facebook or Twitter, AM Live on SAfm. We are joined now by our guest this morning, Dr. Kim Wale, who is the project leader for the Reconciliation Barometer, where she manages the annual South African Reconciliation Barometer survey. And we also have Dr. Siphamandla Zondi, who is director of the Institute for Global Dialogue associated with UNISA. Dr. Zondi and Dr. Wale, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning.
Good morning to the listeners.
Now, let me start with you, Dr. Wale. How does public trust in one another impact on society and how we interact with one another on a daily basis?
Well, I think trust is a key issue. You mentioned that it's one of the basic things, and I agree that it's one of the fundamental things required for deeper connection across race groups. But I also think that it's not basic, it's very deep, and it's one of those things that are going to require a lot of work, because trust is at the level of culture. So at that intangible level of culture and emotion. So it requires quite a lot of work and work over generations.
And as South Africa, do you think that we have done sufficient work in order to get this particular segment of our reconciliation right?
No, I think we've done some of that work, and I think our initial stage of reconciliation was important and perhaps necessarily light, because we were trying to avoid increasing violence and trying to get everyone together on the same page. But I think there's a lot deeper work to be done. We need to move in a more radical stage of reconciliation, where we address the deeper wounds from our histories of violence and oppression.
Dr. Zondi, it seems very evident that there are huge problems when it comes to building trust beyond familiarity. Now, how do we start to encourage South Africans to have more faith, have more trust in other people?
I must just put it up front that I'm no expert on questions of public trust and human existence and philosophical questions of that nature. But my area of interest has been how we build a world which recognizes common humanity and therefore should work together in order to fashion a new world beyond the one that we live under right now. The world we live under right now is about 500 years old. It's the world system we live under right now is about 500 years old, and it will be very interesting to note that it actually begins in January of 1492, when the Muslims were expelled from a Mediterranean area, which is now called Southern Europe, the Iberian Peninsula. And that set forth a whole lot of things which we call modernity, modern world. And that modern world was based on distinction between based on this division of people into human beings and others as lesser beings. And that created the view of life and the view of human beings where some were assumed to be superior and others to be inferior for all sorts of reasons, physical, medical, psychological, and all of those things. And that basis, the South African nation itself was born into that world in which race was a scandal, through which people were distinguished into superior and inferior. And on that basis, then the apartheid is actually born. And what we call post-apartheid is more a wish, an aspiration than a reality, which simply then means that the basis on which deeper trust, deeper skepticism about one another, deeper attitudes of superiority and inferiority remain ingrained in us. And it is just a process that forms part of what we call a luta continua. The struggle for freedom continues after the achievement of democracy. For democracy is not actually achievement of freedom. For freedom will be a freedom from all of these systemic conditions that continue to pull us asunder, create deep mistrust, create deep divisions, create all sorts of difficulties that call into question the legitimacy of some people and affirm the legitimacy of others.
And that would then suggest that as South Africa and South Africans, given our experience, where we come from, what we've been through, and what we continue to experience, it is not abnormal for us to be distrustful of one another then, Dr. Zondi.
Yes, it is the very basis on which what we call the South Africa is based on. The very notion of a modern nation state has been founded on the scandal of race, as I call it, and this assumption of human beings as some as being damned, like mostly black people that for a long period of time been considered damned, and others considered exalted and therefore full human beings. For as long as the underlying thinking that we assume that lies right at the base of our formation of society, create a sense of some as being significant and others being less significant, then we don't quite have significant trust. That is why the process of reconciliation that was supposed to follow the inauguration of democracy, the process of reconciliation did not quite succeed because we are not able to deal with the deeper question of who is human and who is not human, and how we deal with how we have done to each other in the past in order to establish this sense of who is human and who is not human. And as a result, people continue to carry with them the benefits of having been called human, regarded human, and others carry with them the deficit of having been considered subhuman all of their lives. And this is not just a South African problem, but it's a global problem, because the current world system was founded on that very idea from 1492.
Dr. Wale, if one speaks to people, and this is anecdotal, but there seems to be a little more distrust at this point in time, and one just gets a sense that instead of moving forward, we seem to be moving backward on this reconciliation project. Now, in some of your research, have you found that borne out? And also, what do you think fuels some of the distrust, apart from personal experience?
Great. I'm not sure that we're moving backwards so much as that we're coming against the wound more strongly, the wound of not sharing humanity, as Dr. Zondi describes it so well. And so as we move ahead, we're having to deal with the deeper issues that weren't dealt with. So in the beginning, at the first stage of reconciliation, it was important that people came together in a shared project. And they hoped that it would solve some of these issues. But now we're realizing as we move forward that the work that we have to do is at such a deep level, is at such an existential and psychological and also structural level, that it feels as if we're moving backwards, but it's more that we're just coming more into contact and more to grips with the power of the legacy of apartheid and how deeply it was entrenched in society and how much work we're going to actually have to do in order to undo that. And also that it's part of a global system and a global history, so that apartheid's history, as Dr. Zondi was saying, is part of a much longer history, so we're dealing with quite a strong legacy there. One of the things that fuels this distrust, because this is the other question, I think that South Africa also has a particular history of the militarization of society. So across society, during apartheid, Black South Africans lived lives of violence. Continually were faced with police, the brutal pass laws, the comrade movement, violence and wars at their doorstep. And white South Africans as well, white males were conscripted to go and fight against this elusive black and red threat, the Royal Khafar and the Swart Khafar. So we come out of history of extreme violence and oppression where we're taught to fear the other. And then at a subtle level, there were also segregation laws which told us continually and perversely that mixing across races is unnatural and something dangerous. So this is part of, I think, where this fear and this trust comes from. These histories of violence, oppression, and subtle, perverse messages.
But why are we still unable to just talk about it openly and honestly? And I'm going to ask this to both of you, because I just find it strange that when it comes to actually expressing how we feel and, letting the other person know exactly what it is that makes me uncomfortable, makes me mistrust them, we seem to be having great difficulty with those sort of conversations as a nation. Dr. Zondi?
Yes, I do not really know why we're not developing full dialogue about circumstances that we need to confront in order to really fashion a new society, a new idea of South Africa and a new nation. But what I do know is that in this particular case of South Africa, there were serious attempts, and if you look at the whole presidency of Nelson Mandela, the whole life of Nelson Mandela was dedicated at trying to actually urge us all to imagine a new nation, and it was called the Rainbow Nation, an imagination, a hope-for future. And one could say that it's very difficult for those who are privileged in the scandal of the past, for those who are privileged by that which we now all think was bad. It's very difficult for them to extricate them from that, because then thereby they lose the privilege. For example, in South Africa, whiteness is still a form of privilege. It's still a source of pride. It still attracts a lot of benefits, even after 20 years of democracy and black rule and all of that. It's still much more likely for a white matriculant to get a job than a black matriculant. It's still much more likely for a white compatriot to becoming a CEO of one of the companies of the JSC than I would be. It is just a fact of life. But it is very difficult, therefore, for us to transcend our current state for the stage that we are unhappy with, supposed to be unhappy with, and it's a stage, truth be told, that still benefits some. So it's very difficult for those who benefit from it to extricate themselves from it and to allow a process where it is undone and they create and imagine a new system altogether. But I also think that even from the black side, there still is almost an acceptance of the reality, as it were, and hope for crumbs, hope for little changes here and there. And the discourse of reconciliation that actually in the end took place in the 1990s was really almost reduced to reconciliation of the black people with the pain of their past. underprivileged and the underprivileged in order to create a new society where all humans are equal, where all they could find ways of benefiting all the time together. So what I'm arguing is that we've had conversations, but it has not been conversations that are genuine. There have not been conversations that are about imaginary world, where therefore we have had pretty much a dialogue of the deaf, where we think we're talking to each other, but we are not talking to each other.
Dr. Wale?
Yes, this question about why it's so difficult to have the race conversation authentically. One of the concepts we're working through and trying to understand at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation is the concept of woundedness, and this idea that often when we try and have the race conversation, we're talking to each other across our wounds, and we don't have to understand those wounds before we can get to a more authentic place. And I think what comes up when we try to have this conversation is what I think of the frustration denial complex. So, say white South Africans, because of white privilege that Dr. Wale was talking about, because of the desire on the one hand to protect their material legacy, but also because of an emotional boundary of defensiveness. As soon as we start talking about race privilege, the defensive boundary comes up for white South Africans, and they kind of feel, why are you blaming me, why are you criticizing me? And I think that is the wound of the oppressor, that defensiveness, that desire to protect privilege rather than engage in a relationship of shared humanity, which I think will give us so much more than the privilege. And then on the other side, a frustrationness of black South Africans, the sense that white South Africans don't really get it, and they're not willing to try and understand what the lived experience of black South Africans is. So these are the two wounds that we're dealing with. On the one side, the wound of denial and defensiveness, and on the other side, the wound of frustration, which also turns into defensiveness. And then the conversation seems to implode.
And let's try and have that conversation openly, authentically, honestly this morning here on the forum at 8. 0891 104 208. I'd love to hear your views, and you can also send SMSs to 34701. So often we hear people say black South Africa has bent over backwards to accommodate white South Africa, and there's no reciprocation, and therefore we just don't trust white people because all they'll do is exploit us and exploit us even more. And on the side of white South Africans, what is fueling that mistrust, that distrust that you have for black South Africans? Let's go to the lines. Mike in Cape Town, Newlands, good morning.
Good morning, Sakina. Thanks for taking my call. Look, two things. First of all, I've been in business for a long time. I've never heard of anybody not doing business with somebody because he's black or vice versa. It's a known fact that everywhere in the world you go, if you've got a product to sell and the person's going to buy it is black, or you're going to go into a business venture with a person of another color, and you're going to go into to better your life. Obviously, I've never heard of anybody saying, "Oh, but pity you're black or you're white, I'm not doing it." I think we're actually, as a country, doing exceedingly well. I really do. And it's interesting you're having this debate now. You're having it now. I think it's sparked by the fact that we have all these race allegations being bandied around. And unfortunately, I have to lay the door at our government at the moment. Let's just look at what's stirring up some of the problems. Blaine Zamandi calls Nkandla white. I think he said white lies. But, that's a crazy statement to make because Tuli Madonsela is black. So already now we've caused a wedge between color groups. And then we've got our president who says that white woman down there is obviously referring to Premier Zille down here. Now, those kind of statements are driving a wedge between us, and this is what's causing our country to separate. And I'll wager you that after the election, if it's settled down, I go to a rugby game and I see whites going crazy when the black guy scores a try, and vice versa. So, South Africans, we're getting on fine, but I would say we've got to keep race out of politics, and I particularly ask Marius Franklin in conclusion, he's currently making the most awful racist statements about white farmers exploiting colored people and so on. That doesn't help the situation at all, and it's allowed to continue. That's where we've got to draw the line, because I believe as South Africans, we're doing very well, thanks very much.
That's Mike out in Newlands. Now, do you agree or disagree with Mike? And what role does politics and what politicians actually say and do? What role does that play in how you relate trust or distrust other people in South Africa. Let me just read some of the SMSs coming through as well. Cynthia Nkosi says, there's a culture of distrust because of moral regeneration that is lacking. Actions speak volumes. If I see you blundering the issue of trust, then trust will be compromised, be it in politics, works, relationship, or family. Trust is trust, and same principle applies. And then Jacob in Elspruit says, I pray that my fellow South Africans listen to what I'm going to say. All what you're saying is because of the ruling party, the ANC. There's no leadership and reconciliation message from whatever they are saying. Always blaming whites, the race and apartheid after 20 years in power. Look what they have done up to now. Any party could have done even more. To blame whites, they blame whites as a reason why they are corrupt. So to be in power, they have to preach distrust amongst Africans. And Zoe from, I don't know where Zoe's from, but Zoe says, unlucky, you can't trust a black person. They say one thing and they do another. So those some of the SMSs coming through. And I actually don't want to go to our panel just now because I'm going to have to cut you short because we're coming up to news time. Let me rather read a few more SMSs. Rasta says the Zulus, Xhosas, Sutus, Indians, whites must work together with the Rastas to create the so-called rainbow nation, or we will be like Syria. And Joe in Pietermaritzburg says, why do we still distrust one another? Trust must be based on sterner stuff. How can we trust one another when our national wealth is enjoyed by a few while the majority are just producers and spectators? That is what Joe says in Pietermaritzburg. And I'll come back to our panel after the news and get some responses to what we've heard thus far. And of course, take more calls on 0891 104 208 and SMSs on 34701. It's 8:30 and time for news headlines with Aurelie.
Thanks, Sakina. Here's a wrap of stories making the headlines this morning. Today is the deadline for the ANC in Parliament to submit the names of the 7 MPs who will serve on the multi-party committee tasked to consider President Jacob Zuma's response to the Public Protector's report on Nkandla. Negotiations between platinum producers and AMCU are set to resume today following a new wage offer tabled for striking miners. Further afield, Zimbabwe's political and military elites have been accused by non-profit organizations of seizing protected areas in one of Africa's last bastions for elephants, putting large parts of the country at risk of becoming fronts for ivory poaching. And finally, over 100 people have been confirmed dead from the South Korean ferry that capsized last week as divers recovered more bodies from the sunken hull. More news at 9 o'clock.
Traffic on SAfm. Well, just want to take it out of Cape Town to start with. There's a motorcycle accident. Vanguard Drive northbound at Samora Michelle. So motorists leaving the Mitchell's Plain area using the M7 under heavy pressure this morning up towards Govan and Becky Bridge. The rest of Cape Town easing up. The M2 still slow from Bunga Avenue. The M5 not a real problem, just a bit sluggish from Klipfontein Road, but certainly off its worst this morning. M3 from Wynberg Hill up towards Woolsack Drive, still fairly slow in towards the hospital. Then Joburg this morning, taxi on fire. Malabongwe Drive at Stratham Park. If you're coming in from Sharon Lee or coming off the N1 highway ramps to get onto Malabongwe to turn into Randburg, expect a queue there. The Mike 1 sluggish between Corlett Drive and the Grayston Drive off-ramp into Santon. Couple of accidents on the R24 in towards the airport area, just sort of slowing traffic a little bit, most of the obstruction off the road now. Durban, N3 inbound, stationary taxi at Pavilion, very slow traffic from the M13 join at Paradise Valley. If you're leaving Pinetown heading through towards central Durban, you'll queue at least until you get past the obstruction at Pavilion Shopping Centre. Rob Byrne, AM Live, Traffic Watch.
Well, it is just gone 28 minutes before 9 o'clock, and we're going to do a crossing quickly to find out what's happening on Morning Talk with Rowena Bird. Good morning, Rowena.
Good morning, Sakina. Coming up on Morning Talk today, we begin the show this morning by discussing the 5+ Project. It's an initiative aimed at helping to reduce and alleviate poverty in South Africa, and how this project hopes to achieve this is by getting as many relatively well-off South Africans as possible to give give at least 5% of their income to organizations and also to initiatives whose work helps to reduce poverty in South Africa, or at least alleviate its effects. Well, is this the solution to poverty in South Africa, and what do you think it will take to stop this vicious cycle of poverty? We'll be talking about that in the first hour of today's program. In the second hour of the show, we will have Property Matters with Dineo Mulomo for the entire hour. Brian Hirsch is away today, and Dineo will focus on buying versus building a new home. Which is the better option? Obviously, if you are in the property market right now and you're not sure which option to go for, it would be helpful and prudent for you to tune in between 10 and 11. It actually promises to make great radio, so even if you're not buying currently, I do urge you to listen in. In the final hour of the show today, we will talk about Swaziland and its politics. The Communist Party of Swaziland has this past weekend held its third national conference, and it was held in Barberton in Mpumalanga. And at the meeting, they called for political reforms in Swaziland and say they're forced to hold meetings in South Africa outside of their borders because political parties are still banned in Swaziland. We'll have more on that story after the 11 o'clock news, and that's the show for today. Thank you, Sakina.
The Forum at 8 on SAfm.
Why do we distrust one another? That's the question we're asking on the Forum at 8 this morning. And we'd love to hear your views, honestly and sincerely. What is it about each other that puts us off, that stops us, hinders us from trusting one another? Our guest this morning, Dr. Kim Wale, who is project leader for the Reconciliation Barometer, where she manages the annual South African Reconciliation Barometer survey. And we're also joined by Dr. Spamandla Zondi, who's director at the Institute for Global Dialogue, which is associated with UNISA. Now, Dr. Zondi, just very quickly, a response to what Mike was saying before the break, and also some of the SMSs that came through.
Actually, Sakina, if you listen to the conversations that people were making there, and if you listen to many conversations on the radio and other talk radios and all of that stuff, that if you really watch carefully, we use whatever we talk about to almost throw stones at each other. There is almost an underlying, we use whatever conversation is as a metaphor for saying that you are to blame. All the problems in South Africa began after 94, so forgive our past. You know, and then the other side say, no, the problems are only in the past and are not in the present. This simply nicely illustrates this. The second thing that often happens, and happened right now, is to say, take race out of politics. As if race is not in politics, it's been brought into politics. When actually our politics was born in race. When the first modern politics took place in KwaZulu-Natal under Theophilus Shopstein, was on the basis of the fact that the natives must be managed. So race was always ingrained in our politics, and we haven't done something to atone for that which happened. So don't play the race card. As if a race card is some option that you can use from time to time. It is not a reality of existence. It doesn't mediate options, opportunities in society. It doesn't mediate attitudes and other things. Race is a real issue that is at the foundation of South Africa. We have to come to terms with it and then decide how to build a non-racial society, not one that denies race.
And Dr. Wale, interesting that we somehow seem to constantly find our way back to politics and politicians.
Yes, that's true. And it's interesting that in the Reconciliation Barometer, political parties are rated with the lowest trust from citizens. But I think it's true what Dr. Zondi is saying, that the reason the race card can be used in the first place, the reason that it has so much purchase, is because it's a real issue. So instead of saying let's take race out of politics, let's deal with the issue of race in society so it no longer has such purchase in politics.
But let's hear what some of the other callers have to say. 0891 104 208. Tabiso is calling us from Polokwane. Good morning.
Good morning, Sakina. I think if you look, when we took power, when the majority took power in 1994, you still have a situation where you had people leaving the country on the basis that they did not believe that the black majority will be able to deliver the country where it is. And then secondly, you also had, areas like, what is called Ryan and many others, where you have a particular sector of individuals saying, we don't want to stay with blacks. So that's the major problem. We've been trying ourselves to say, want to accommodate these people. We're moving along with reconciliation based on the fact that, this has been preached prior 1995 and all of that. But the other sector of race does not want to come on board and say, no, really, this is what we mean on reconciliation, and we want all of us as South Africans move towards a correct angle. We are the ones, black people have been only the ones that have been tried. Even if you look in terms of the sharing of economy, the typical example has always been the West and East Germany after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. You had a situation where both of them were able to say, how do we make sure that we build an economy of all the Germans? But in South Africa, the difference is altogether, because it's blacks who still continue to suffer, and it's the most who still continue to have more.
And the economy is an important part, but how else do you suggest, white South Africa comes to the party? Let's hear from KGM in Cape Town. Good morning.
Good morning, Sakina, and good morning to your guest. Sakina, I'm going to point a finger, for a lack of a better word. Firstly, the leadership of the African National Congress as the people who were at the forefront of the liberation, or the discussion rather, during the pre-talks and the talks, under the leadership of President Mandela, are largely to be blamed. I'm paining Sakina. If I wished Dr. Mandela would have not passed on, not having accounted for what actually happened at CODESA. That's the first thing, and I don't have time to elaborate on that.
But I want you to elaborate, because I'm trying to understand. When you say he needed to account, what sort of accounting are you looking for?
All right. Sakina, firstly, let me say I participated in the pre-talks and the talks. There was two sets of talks. The talks before the talks were preparing for CODESA 1. And CODESA 1 and CODESA 2 sort of emulated what South Africans wished for. The composition was simple. Participation had to be from all the quarters of the society. Now, what happened is the political relation of our society took over, as if other sectors of the society were not important. For instance, there was a time when we had an opportunity, Sakina, as South Africans, black, white, pink, purple, whatever. There was a time when there was a concession that South Africa cannot move anywhere into any direction of normality if the black majority is still going to be impoverished, is still going to be undermined in terms of all the atrocities that happened due to apartheid. And fundamentally, the issues of the economy was at the core of everything. Now, we opted, I'm including myself because I was part of the talks, we led people into this. We opted for this semanticism of giving people an empty dome, if you like it, by saying the political freedom was more important. Now, we bought the political freedom. The political freedom proves now to be worthless because the economic freedom is still not there. Now, you cannot reason with people on an empty stomach, Sakina. It's very easy for the white folk who have benefited over the years to say, oh yes, it's 50 years and we're still talking white people did this. It takes 100 years to reverse a situation that has been caused over the time frame that we have.
KGM, I think we need longer conversation about this specific matter. But what is the solution then? How do we move forward from where we are right now?
It's very easy. Maybe easier said than done, Sakina, but it's very easy in this context. Our leaders, some of our leaders, and I'm glad that Reverend Mpilo Tutu is still alive. Abu Mama Winnie Mandela, they're still alive. A few of the stalwarts, some of the people who have participated in CODES, especially those who are honest, they need to come out and tell the nation the truth about what transpired at CODES. And secondly, we need black and white South Africans to own up to the mess that they've created since 1994. In this case, I'm talking about the beneficiaries of the past and the current beneficiaries who have sought to say, you know what, we've tasted this, we don't want to let go of it. It's okay, let's continue with the status quo. Let's not liberate the overwhelming majority of the people. We need the truth.
Okay.
There's no other way, Sakina, other than telling the people the truth.
Absolutely. And we need to be truthful to ourselves, with ourselves and with others as well. Let's go to Clive in Cape Town. Good morning, Clive.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Clearly, Clive.
Hi. I just wanted to point out that one of your speakers early on in the conversation came up with a date, 1492, and announced that this was the current start of our modern world. And I just buy this theory, and one of the reasons is that I believe that all nations throughout history have distrusted each other, whether they were Chinese, English, Roman, Greek, black, white, pink, purple. In their nature, they distrust each other. Now, that isn't to say that I agree that they should, or it's a good thing, but it has happened throughout nature, and it is wrong to point out that one nation doesn't trust the other, but the other one is a great nation and trusts everyone. I think we have to find our common humanity and understand that we don't stand alone in South Africa. We stand in the world history, and we're not alone. And every other nation's gone through the same thing, and every other nation has the same sort of problems. And some nations have dealt with them successfully, and some haven't. We need to find common humanity and not blame each other. That's not to say that someone isn't responsible for the mess we're in. That the apartheid government didn't cause most of the problems. Obviously, they did. But we need to look beyond that to common humanity.
How do you suggest we go about doing that, Clive, given that people are feeling aggrieved, on both sides about something or the other? How do we go about forging that common humanity?
Well, I think that one of the callers got it right, is that we need to contain ourselves from continuing the racial stereotypes. And we, whether or not the previous regime used them for its own benefit, which we all agree that they did, we must discontinue this process. We must announce now that what is important is how we treat each other now, and how we are fair to each other, and how, in as most religions would say, that we do unto others as we wish to be done unto ourselves. And once we understand that, then we will move forward. And until we understand that, we'll move nowhere. We'll just get stuck in the same quagmire that the Romans faced, the Greeks faced, the Chinese faced, and every nation faced when they announced to themselves that they were better than their neighbors. And they've all done it. Everybody has done this in history. Every nation, including black nations, have announced that they were better than their neighbors, and it has never led to any good. That's what I believe.
Thank you so much for your contribution there, Clive. Let's go to Midrand now. Luther, good morning.
Good morning, Sajina.
Welcome, Luther.
Thanks. I just want to make a quick comment. I wanna firstly say that it's unfortunate that when you talk about mistrust, we rush into white and black. In fact, we must go a little bit back. If you go to KwaZulu-Natal, for instance, the Indians and the Zulus there, they don't trust each other. I can even add that Zulus and Xhosas don't trust each other, Shangans, and you have to go back there because then you ask the question, but why is it happening that even among Africans themselves there is an issue about prejudice and all that? And the answer is that the 350 years of colonialism, let alone apartheid. I mean, apartheid is just 40 years ago. But 350 years of colonialism and apartheid has created societies, has divided societies to try to do divide and rule. And in that process, they created this prejudice. And out of this prejudice, they were easy to rule. but not only for their own benefit, but the people also believed in those prejudices. I mean, the truth must be told that even if you take Indians in KwaZulu-Natal, they have very strong prejudice against the Zulus and vice versa. Now, I want to illustrate my point in this fashion. And that is the problem. I'm coming to the one about white and black, why there is a distrust. And it's a very interesting thing. When I grew up, I just never understood why would white people hate black people so much, say such bad things about them, kill them the way they treat them, when the black mothers are the one who are looking after that. I never understood that, because it was a crazy thing for me that how do you talk so bad about this person who's looking after your very precious thing called a child? But if you were to think about this, Sakina, if there are two people, a man and a woman, and I'm gonna use this illustration, and the man abuses the wife for 300 years, and at a particular point, the family is called upon to solve this thing. So let's say 350, 1994 is that period. And the husband who was abusing the wife doesn't want us to talk too much about that abuse, doesn't want the wife to explain how she felt about the abuse and show this cast and whatever. He says, no, look, I accept, there were reasons why I'm doing this, let's move forward. And the whole parents who are there to resolve this things also fall into this thing that let's move forward. What you are doing, you are artificially moving forward, and because the wife still feel the abuse, this abuse will continue to manifest itself. It's going to continue to come back and back. And that's how I illustrate the situation in South Africa, that black people were forced to just go forward. We are forced not to talk about things. We are forced to say everything is okay. All the white people are calling them and say, no, let's move forward. Let's not talk about this, because their life has not changed. They were not abused. They didn't take the pain. They haven't taken the pain. We want to talk about this pain, because it's only when we are allowed to talk about the pain that we must go forward. And only way, this is my last comment, is if the wealth of this country is shared equally among black and white, then that is the only solution to go forward. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time. Thanks, Akina.
Thank you so much, Luther. And before I throw it back to the panel, let me just read some more SMSs coming through. Mangali in Mahikeng says, we distrust one another because we are two nations, one black and disadvantaged by apartheid, and the other white and economically advantaged for 70 years. Then Charles H. in Ladysmith says, trust equals common understanding reinforced with a common language so that it is easier to reach out and connect with one another. Spiwo in KZN writes to us and says, as long as there's a wide gap of inequality in South Africa, distrust will continue unabated. We're more likely to trust someone of our own class than one who is poorer. And then WM says, at this time of pre-election in South Africa, every political party is fueling distrust in campaigning against one another. It has just heightened in election season. And then Stelo Nyundu says, how can we trust whites if they still earn more than us and still own a large portion of our land? And Dr. Monet Mostert says, if you keep looking for the wound, you will keep finding it and perpetuate victimhood. Many are benefiting from perpetuating mistrust. Now that's a very interesting one, because it goes right back to what Luther was talking about, Dr. Wale.
Yes, that's true. There's been so much that's been brought up in this conversation, and the one point that I really do want to speak about, though, is the intersection between race and class, because I don't think we've adequately explored that, and it's such an important intersection when we try and understand the nature of the wound and the nature of race and how it intersects with class and how we deal with that in trying to come to terms with our history and create a new future.
Indeed, and that's a very interesting one, as you say, because as one of the SMSs highlighted, they would rather trust someone of their own class rather than their own race. Dr. Zombie?
Yes, I also do imagine that as time evolves, we will discover this post-racial society as a world. It's very important for us not just to blame apartheid, because apartheid was just one form of colonialism, but which could, but colonialism is a bigger term, and it begins really in 1492 with the expulsion of Arabs and Islamic people from Europe in order to create a purely white Europe. and doesn't extend to colonizing globally after the through Americas and then Africa and Asia and so on. And therefore the concept that you could look beyond, we need to rediscover common humanity, we need to move on, and that's it's very, very important one. But thinking that I keep battling with this in my mind. When you say rediscover humanity, common humanity, you mean it was lost somewhere. But if you don't talk about where it was lost, how do you discover it? Unless you are perpetuating this notion of national reconciliation that we saw in the 1990s, which says black people reconcile but don't remember what happened. So to reconcile without the truth. So you would have the ministers of the apartheid government, or even those who ran the colonial government before, not coming before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to say, we are sorry for what happened. And then we expect people to forgive you, but we have not said sorry. Even one bishop in 2011 said, perhaps white people should just accept that there's something that happened over 5 centuries. And really just a token of saying we really want to move on, want to build a new society, and not going to this privilege of scandal.
But then we get into a conversation.
They started with FW de Klerk, and the rest of them, remember the small white voices are very powerful. They completely undid Tutu's proposal, and when we are told to move on. And how do you move on with pain in you?
And what form would that token come in? And would it be enough if, for example, white people simply said, we are sorry? Would black people be satisfied with that and be willing to move on? Because it's very interesting what Luther was saying. He finds this notion of being forced to move on very difficult to accept. But let me just read a few other SMSs coming through. Earl Smiles writes to us and he says the main reason why there is still this racial distrust is because one race still considers itself superior to the other. Then there's also the fact that some feel it is our time now instead of working together for the common good of all South Africans. Mziwa Kolo Mayetwa says the human nature does not trust others, very simply. And then PJ Mac Rampele says, morning listeners, this culture emanates from the history we had. If leaders can lie and later get caught out to have been lying, what does that mean to ordinary folk like me? It means I won't trust politicians anymore. But how does that extend then, Mac, to other people? And then Chinemo Elia says, well, because trust is earned, it is tricky to trust others, and I don't think we can eradicate distrust soon. Pelelani Duma says, because of our history, I myself don't trust Indians and white people. And Makina Daniel says, because when people trust, disappointment usually follows. So, and we just get angry when we are disappointed. So those some of the other contributions coming through. Well, we are going to have to wrap it up. So, Dr. Wale, how do we forge a way forward from this? Because one would assume that trust will be important in our way forward as South Africa, as a nation.
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's been an interesting contradiction between moving forward and moving backwards that keeps on coming up. And I think I would say that to move forward, we do have to pause and move backward, because there are certain wounds, there are certain legacies, there are certain versions of history that we don't all agree on yet. So we have moved forward perhaps too quickly, but it was necessary at the time. Now we have to go backwards. We have to deal with those wounds. We have to understand each other's understanding, and where that doesn't fit, or one race thinks one thing, another race thinks another thing, we have to understand that, and we need to come to that common understanding. So in conclusion, I think that we should be brave enough to take a pause and be willing to go back and be willing to deal with the really difficult stuff that's causing this mistrust.
And Dr. Zondi?
Yes, I know there will be a lot of things that people need to do, but for me, 3 things are very important. One is to accept that we have not quite transcended our past. Our past still very much is with us because of the nature of transition we had. It was never a break with the past, but was an attempt to live with the past in the hope that he would kill it slowly over a period of time, perhaps over a generation. And for that reason, therefore, we need dialogue such as the dialogue which I said this morning, but have a lot more dialogue. Allow the wound to be scratched. Perhaps that is how it is going to heal. Confront the wound and accept that the privileges of the past continue to persist with us now, so that then we can then imagine a new common humanity on the basis, in my view, of Ubuntu, as it represents the idea of human beings, not race and color, because race and color are all forms of identity. For below the skin, some of the skin are actually the same, but the culture that has been infused since 1492 is to assume that there is some form of natural distinction by basis of the color of the race, and others have accrued a lot of privilege and power out of that circumstance.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to our guest this morning, Dr. Siphamandla Zondi, who is Director at the Institute for Global Dialogue associated with UNISA, and Dr. Kim Wale, Project Leader for the Reconciliation Barometer, where she manages the annual South African Reconciliation Barometer Survey. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And thank you, as always, for your great participation this morning, and for all the tweets, the SMSs, and the calls that came through. We certainly do appreciate it. And of course, to the team that made sure it all went out loud and clear, our team of producers this morning, Ntswaki Ku, Apiwe Honono, Tracy Bungard, Jake Mukoma, and Maruma Kekana, our senior producer Obriel Mpofu, foreign producers Ronald Piri and Hlengiwe Mabaso, technical producer Mark Preller, our special producer Vudzi Lukoto, and then of course our executive producers Busi Chane and Aubrey Sechie. That's how we come to the end of this morning's show. We thank you once again for your indulgence this morning, as every other morning, and hope to meet up with you again bright and early, 6 to 9 a.m. here on South Africa's news and information leader, SAfm.